Welcome back to The Fix with me, Karima Brown. Now it's time to look ahead. Welcome to my panel. We've got the Executive Director of Casac, Mr. Lawson Naidoo, who is in our Cape Town studios, as well as political journalist Samkele Maseko from eNCA, and of course the Banking Association of South Africa's Coovadia, who joins us on the line, and of course Peter Bruce from the Sunday Times. Gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the program. Let me start with you, Lawson. Tomorrow is D-Day. The Cons Court makes an announcement on whether or not Shaun Abrahams gets to hold his position. How significant is tomorrow's developments, and how important is it that the step that is taken rebuilds the trust and the integrity of the National Prosecuting Authority?
Good evening, Karima. Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, I think this case is this case is much more than about Shaun Abrahams. This is really, as you said, about the integrity and independence of the National Prosecuting Authority, which is an organization that sits at the pinnacle of the criminal justice system in our country. And the reason Casac initially challenged the golden handshake to Mr. Mkolisi in Kasana was precisely because we felt that that settlement agreement undermined the independence of the NPA, that it allowed the president far too much undue influence in removing a national director of public prosecutions. So this case is really about restoring the independence of the NPA, and we hope very much that the Constitutional Court will tomorrow uphold the decision of the High Court that was handed down in December, which said that the removal of Mr. Nkasana was unconstitutional and unlawful, and therefore the appointment of Mr. Abrahams was invalid. The court also made two very important findings that Casac applied for, ruling that Section 12(4) of the NPA Act, which provides for the President with the discretion to extend the tenure of a national director if that person reaches the age of 65, that is unconstitutional and wiped from the statute books. And secondly, that if a national director or deputy national director, as we're going to likely see now in the cases of Namkobo Jiba and Lawrence and Rebbe, that if they are suspended pending an inquiry into holding office, that they be suspended on full pay, so that that mechanism is not used as a punitive measure to punish people that the executive authority is unhappy with. So these are far-ranging decisions that the Concourt is grappling with, and we certainly hope that the decision will, as I say, uphold the High Court judgment from December.
Peter, you wanted to get
Yeah, Lawson, hi. I was wondering what has taken the Concourt so long? I mean, normally you would have expected, as you say, the High Court had done a judgment in December. It's almost December again, and it's... I mean, is the court functioning properly, or have there been disagreement? Why has it taken so long?
Well, you know, I don't know the answer to that, Peter. It has taken long, because if we think back, you know, the High Court, when it issued its judgment in December, did so within, you know, shortly, you know, I think it was only 2 weeks after the hearing took place, the argument in the High Court. Here we're sitting 5.5 months after the argument in the High Court at the end of February this year. You know, there's been lots of speculation as to why it's taken this long for the judgment to come around. I've got no idea, but I'm glad the day is now here so that we can have this judgment and move on from there.
And Lawson, would you
this is an important judgment.
Would you expect a replacement to be announced immediately if the court rules that his appointment was unconstitutional?
Well, I would imagine that that such an announcement should be forthcoming fairly quickly, because I would assume that President Ramaphosa has applied his mind to this matter, knowing that this is a possible outcome of this judgment, and I'm sure that, you know, he would have had his short list of candidates and have a pretty good idea of who he wants to appoint now.
Samkele, let me bring you in here. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation about who is going to replace Shaun Abrahams. We're not sure whether he's going to be completely removed or whether he's just going to be removed as head of the NPA. Vusi Pikoli is a frontrunner. Which other names have you heard?
Look, I haven't heard much names, but I've heard the name of Vusi Pikoli. I'm not yet sure whether he'll take over from Shaun Abrahams or whether Shaun Abrahams' issue will go tomorrow once the Crown Court rules on whether he's fit to hold office or not. But what we can certainly read out of the situation is that the Crown Court themselves, they are divided over this issue. They don't want to pretty much encroach on the governance side of how the country is run, and they've said on a number of occasions that they do not want to enter the political arena. Some of these judges, during that verdict on former President Jacob Zuma and how his presidency played out, have said that the judiciary has oftentimes had to make some sort of political decision, whether directly or indirectly. So it's going to be interesting on how the Shaun Abrahams issue plays out, but we can certainly see that there is no love lost between himself and the incumbent president of the Republic of South Africa. So goes with Lawrence Mkhwebe and Advocate Nomgcobo Jiwa, which tells you that pretty much the incumbent president of the country wants a clean sweep of the National Prosecuting Authority, so that it doesn't have a cloud hanging over its head, seeing that some perceived it as to be a Jacob Zuma defense army.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's important that these institutions not be politicized any further. Let's get Cass Coovadia from the Banking Association on the line. Cass, one of the issues that we've just discussed with Minister Zweli Mkhize is, of course, the attempt by some in the African National Congress to save VBS, which is in fact currently under investigation by the South African Reserve Bank, by forensic investigators. We're sitting here with a document that gives you an idea of what the Limpopo PEC tried to do, and they tried to leverage, their political clout. As someone who represents the banking institutions, how did it happen that a mutual bank was used by municipalities that are clearly prohibited in terms of legislation from doing so? They are meant to be doing, a business with commercial banks.
Rahima, thanks for having me. I think firstly one needs to look at the municipalities that are involved, because according to the MFMA, they are prohibited from depositing money or doing business with a mutual bank. They should do business with commercial banks because safety reasons and because they need access to their deposits at a very short notice, and commercial banks are able to do that. I think how it happened, I don't know. I guess the forensic auditor and the person actually responsible now for the curator will have to tell us. We read in the media that commissions were paid to people to actually attract the municipal deposits, which would also be very improper. So, I mean, I can't comment on VBS itself because we're not the regulator and we're not involved in regulating them or in the curatorship. But I can only comment on what I read in the media. But I think the municipalities themselves, some work needs to be done to see how the chief accounting officers in those municipalities actually took the decision to break the MFMA.
Cass, are there many of these mutual banks in South Africa, or is this a lone example?
This is one of three.
One of three.
Yeah.
And are they in the greater banking scheme of things? Are they important? Does it matter whether they exist or don't exist?
No, I think it is important that they exist because mutual banks are a good mechanism if properly managed and run to enable people to, because a depositor actually becomes a shareholder, has a say or should have a say in shareholder meetings and so on. It's a mechanism to actually enable people to save and deposit their money. And I think that lower income people can actually use mutual banks to do that.
So is VBS worth saving?
In principle, there's nothing wrong with the institution. I have experience. I mean, when I was involved in the late 80s, early 90s in community banks, we were the first mutual bank to be registered, and I think it's a very good institution.
So is VBS an institution worth saving?
Well, as I said, if properly managed and properly operated, I think they can be good institutions.
Samkele, I want to bring you in here. We've had a cabinet lekgotla. Very little was said about it. We read in the newspapers that there's supposedly a rescue plan for ailing state-owned companies like SAA, like the SABC. I mean, where is the money going to come from? I spoke to some officials in Treasury earlier this morning when I was just trying to get my head around it. And they said they find it really strange because Cabinet normally don't discuss that kind of allocations. I mean, you have been covering the lekgotla. What were the important things that came out there for you? Was a rescue plan even discussed for these institutions?
It certainly was discussed because if you'd remember, Karima, on the first day of the Cabinet lekgotla, the main topic on the agenda and the only thing on the agenda was the South African economy. You had the Minister of Finance, giving an overview of South Africa's economic position as it currently stands. And then you had the hot topic issue of land expropriation without compensation. You had the state of state-owned enterprises. They looked at Eskom, Denel, SABC. And for instance, I just want to go back to the issue of VBS.
Yes.
VBS is very important in a sense that the man who've just interviewed now, the current Minister of Coovadia, is a former Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, and there is a bank called Ithala Bank in KwaZulu-Natal. And you've got the Limpopo Provincial ANC now speaking to National Luthuli House, saying that they've got to save VBS, and if it's possible, turn VBS into Ithala Bank of Limpopo under the Limpopo Development Agency, which now tells you that VBS is also political. And also with the state-owned enterprises at a national level, they can't seem to be ailing forever because they are used in political electioneering. For instance, if the SABC were to go down or if Eskom were to go down, the opposition parties would use that as an electioneering tool. It goes back to what happened just before the president of the ANC, if I'm not mistaken, and president of the country then, deputy president then, went abroad to the economic forums. He had to sort out Eskom because Eskom could plunge this country into an economic crisis, which tells you how important the state-owned enterprises are and how central they were in the state capture inquiry.
And how delicate they are, because you have we have in the papers today a letter from Pravin Gordhan, now the Minister of Public Enterprises, to the Mayor of Johannesburg, saying, please don't pull your loan to Denel, otherwise everything starts unraveling. And we end up being a vassal of the World Bank.
Yes. Lawson, I want to bring you and Kaz in both on the question of land expropriation. I mean, you are specifically looking at issues around the Constitution. There were many in the African National Congress who said that we have all the tools in the Constitution to actually bring about greater land justice. Kaz, on your end, you are responsible for bankrolling a lot of the farmers. You actually own many of their farms. This is a move that is going to make it really hard for President Cyril Ramaphosa to, in fact, walk that delicate balance. I've got less than 30 seconds for you guys to answer. I'm going to start with you, Cass, and I'm going to end off with you, Lawson. Cass, your response to that issue around changing the Constitution?
Well, we've taken the view, Karima, that the Constitution, as it's currently formed, does allow for what is on the table at the moment, does allow for EWC. That we are obviously concerned that the exposure that the banks have out there, which is in the vicinity of about 180 billion rand, is not threatened in any way, because that would not be good for the country and for the economy. So we have given a submission to the Constitutional Review Committee. We will continue to engage, and we would hope and are reasonably confident that we will come to a pragmatic outcome on this. I can't see responsible leadership in government doing this in a way that actually has any sort of an impact on growth and on investment, both of which we need in a big way at the moment.
As we're running out of time, I want to get a last quick 20-second comment from you, Lawson, on that matter.
Yeah, look, Karima, I agree that, I don't believe it's necessary to amend the Constitution to effect expropriation without compensation. It's clearly provided for in the Constitution. It simply hasn't been tested. But the reality is, if there is an amendment to the Constitution, then we will need to see exactly the parameters of that amendment and whether it really, merely simply clarifies or provides guidelines as to how expropriation is conducted, something that could simply be done through the current expropriation bill through Parliament rather than fiddling with the Constitution itself.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so very much. That about wrapped it up for this week's Look Ahead. Still coming up on the program, the cool stuff.